October 6, 1941, near the village of Pervy Voin, Oral region. A Panzer III crew from the 4th Panzer Division scanned the tree line ahead through the autumn mist. The division, part of Heinz Guderian's Panzer Group II, had been advancing toward Moscow with the confidence born of 4 months of uninterrupted victories. Since June 22nd, the Wehrmacht had crushed Soviet resistance with a speed that had stunned the world. Tank columns that should have taken weeks to destroy were eliminated in days. Entire Soviet armies simply ceased to exist. The advance had been so rapid that German tank crews joked about running out of fuel before running out of enemy. The T-26 and BT-7 tanks they encountered burned easily. Their thin armour no match for German guns. Soviet crews, poorly trained and often abandoned by their officers, frequently fled their vehicles at the first sight of Panzers. The mathematics of Operation Barbarossa seemed irrefutable. German superiority in training, tactics and leadership would carry them to Moscow before winter. But something had changed in the past week near the town of Mtsensk. German units had encountered Soviet tanks that didn't behave according to the established pattern. These new machines, designated T-34 in German intelligence reports, possessed armour that deflected shells which would have penetrated any previous Soviet tank. They moved with a speed and agility that caught German crews off guard. Most disturbing, they were commanded with a tactical sophistication the Wehrmacht had not seen from Soviet armour. On this October morning, approximately 40 German tanks were advancing to support motorised infantry that had been pinned down. The operation should have been routine. What happened in the next 20 minutes would be discussed in hushed tones for weeks afterward. 4 T-34 tanks emerged from concealed positions in the tree line, their commanders having waited until the German column was committed to the attack. The first shots destroyed command tanks, disrupting German coordination. The second shots penetrated other Panzer IIIs, igniting their ammunition. The Soviet tanks moved with coordinated precision. They concentrated fire on German tanks, methodically destroying them one by one, while their hulls remained angled to deflect return fire. When German crews attempted to flank them, the T-34s reversed at speeds no German tank could match, disappeared into the forest, and reappeared at unexpected angles. In less than 15 minutes, 15 German tanks were destroyed or disabled. The motorised infantry battalion escaped. When the 4 T-34s finally withdrew, they did so in perfect order, their rear tank providing covering fire while the others moved to new positions. Colonel General Heinz Guderian received the after-action report that evening. The losses were significant but not catastrophic by the standards of the Eastern Front. What troubled the architect of German armoured doctrine was not the number of tanks lost, but the manner of their loss. The Soviet tank commander who had led this action demonstrated an understanding of armoured warfare that matched anything Guderian had seen from British or French opponents. The T-34 itself, which German intelligence had initially dismissed, was proving superior to German tanks in several critical categories. Guderian ordered increased reconnaissance of the Mtsensk sector. The reports that came back over the following weeks painted a disturbing picture. In one sector, a single T-34 was consistently appearing at the worst possible moments for German advances. It destroyed tanks, disrupted infantry movements, and vanished before German forces could mount an effective response. The tank's commander seemed to possess an uncanny ability to read German tactical intentions. What Guderian and his division commanders did not know was that they were facing Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Lavrinenko, a tank commander from the Kuban Cossack region, who was becoming the highest-scoring Allied tank ace of World War II. In just 2.5 months of combat, Lavrinenko would destroy 52 German tanks, a feat no other Allied tank commander would match during the entire war. Lavrinenko was born on October 14, 1914, in the village of Bestrashnaya, in Krasnodar Krai. The village name translates as fearless, and he would live up to that designation. He volunteered for the Red Army in 1934 and graduated from the Ulyanovsk Tank Academy in May 1938. He participated in Soviet operations in Poland in 1939 and Bessarabia in 1940, gaining practical experience in armoured warfare during these relatively unopposed advances. When Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, The catastrophic defeats of the first weeks nearly destroyed Soviet tank forces. German air superiority and tactical coordination overwhelmed Soviet units that had been caught unprepared. During the chaotic retreat, one incident revealed Lavrinenko's character. His tank developed mechanical problems, and standard procedure called for disabled tanks to be destroyed to prevent capture. Lavrinenko refused. He convinced his superiors to allow him to bring the vehicle back to repair facilities, demonstrating the determination that would characterize his combat career. In September 1941, Colonel Mikhail Katukov was forming the 4th Tank Brigade as part of the desperate Soviet effort to halt Guderian's advance on Moscow. Katukov, who would later become one of the Soviet Union's most successful armor commanders, understood that traditional Soviet tank tactics had failed catastrophically. The rigid formations and frontal attacks that Soviet doctrine prescribed resulted in slaughter when facing German combined arms tactics. Katukov needed commanders who could think independently and adapt to battlefield realities. Lavrinenko was assigned to the 4th Tank Brigade as a platoon commander. The brigade was equipped with a mix of older BT-7 tanks and the new T-34 medium tanks. The T-34 represented a technological leap for Soviet armor. Its sloped armor could deflect German shells. Its diesel engine was more reliable than German gasoline engines. Its wide tracks distributed weight effectively, allowing operation in mud and snow. Its 76mm gun could destroy any German tank at combat ranges. But technology alone could not guarantee success. The T-34 had been rushed into production with design flaws. The 2-man turret forced the commander to serve as gunner, limiting his ability to observe the battlefield. The transmission was prone to failure. Vision devices were inadequate. Radio equipment was scarce. The T-34's potential could only be realized by commanders who understood both its strengths and limitations. Lavrinenko grasped the essential truth about the T-34. The tank was not designed for frontal assaults. Its armor, while superior to older Soviet tanks, could not withstand sustained fire from German guns at close range. The T-34's advantage lay in mobility and shock. It could reach positions German tanks could not, fire from unexpected angles, and withdraw before enemy forces could respond effectively. This understanding shaped Lavrinenko's tactical approach. He spent hours studying terrain where his brigade would operate, identifying positions that offered cover, fields of fire, and escape routes. He trained his crews relentlessly on quick mounting and dismounting. He developed hand signals to maintain communication when radios failed. Most critically, he insisted on thorough reconnaissance before every engagement. General Dmitri Lavrinenko, who commanded the 1st Guards Special Rifle Corps that included Katukov's Tank Brigade, later recalled Lavrinenko's methods. The lieutenant would disguise his tanks by mounting logs that resembled tank guns, drawing German fire to dummy positions while his actual tanks remained concealed. When German forces approached within range, Lavrinenko would unleash devastating ambushes. On one occasion, Lavrinenko destroyed 9 German tanks, 2 guns, and numerous infantry using this deception. The engagement at Pervy Voyn on October 6th demonstrated Lavrinenko's tactical maturity. Leading 4 T-34 tanks, he had positioned his force in wooded terrain overlooking the route German forces would take. He waited until the German column was committed to the attack, their tanks concentrated with limited room to maneuver. The first shots destroyed command tanks, disrupting coordination. Subsequent shots targeted tanks attempting to establish firing positions. Lavrinenko's crew worked with practiced efficiency. The engagement ended when Lavrinenko judged that remaining longer would risk encirclement by German reinforcements. His 4 tanks had destroyed 15 Panzers and saved a Soviet infantry unit. German after-action reports noted the exceptional skill of the Soviet tank commanders involved, but had no way to identify the specific officer responsible. They were facing an enemy who did not advertise his presence with radio chatter or distinctive markings. Lavrinenko understood that anonymity was survival on the modern battlefield. Over the following weeks, Lavrinenko continued to demonstrate tactical brilliance. On October 9th, near the village of Shaino, his single tank repelled an attack by 10 German Panzers. Using ambush tactics, Lavrinenko constantly changed positions, firing from one location and immediately relocating before German crews could coordinate return fire. The engagement ended with one German tank destroyed and the attack dispersed. On November 11, 1941, the 4th Tank Brigade received the designation 1st Guards Tank Brigade, the first Soviet tank unit to earn Guards status. This honor recognized the brigade's performance during the battles of Mauthausensk, where Katukov's forces had inflicted the first significant reverse on Guderian's Panzer group. The brigade had destroyed 133 German tanks, 49 guns, and 8 aircraft. Within this successful brigade, Lavrinenko's platoon stood out for exceptional effectiveness. The defensive battles around Moscow in November 1941 placed enormous pressure on Soviet tank forces. German units continued pressing toward the Soviet capital, with the desperation of forces that understood winter was approaching. In this desperate fighting, Lavrinenko's tactical skill became increasingly valuable. On November 17th, near the village of Listsevo, Lavrinenko commanded a mixed force of 3 T-34 tanks and 3 older BT-7 tanks against 18 German Panzers. The odds seemed impossible. The BT-7 tanks were obsolete, their armour inadequate against German guns. A conventional attack would result in destruction within minutes. Lavrinenko positioned his 6 tanks in 3 groups of 2, each consisting of 1 D-34 and 1 BT-7. He placed them in carefully selected positions that maximized cover while providing clear fields of fire. The T-34s would engage German armour while the BT-7 provided supporting fire against lighter targets. The battle lasted several hours. Lavrinenko's tanks would fire, withdraw to alternate positions, and engage again from unexpected angles. German attempts to flank the Soviet positions were disrupted by the BT-7 tanks, which used their superior speed to relocate and threaten German flanks. By the time German reinforcements arrived, Lavrinenko's force had destroyed or disabled multiple panzers while suffering no tank losses. German commanders facing Lavrinenko's sector began to recognize patterns. A single T-34, sometimes accompanied by other tanks but often operating alone, was consistently appearing at critical moments. It struck with precision, destroyed German vehicles, and vanished before concentrated force could be brought against it. German units began requesting additional reconnaissance before operations in that sector, slowing their advance. What German intelligence did not understand was that Lavrinenko's success came from disciplined preparation. Before every engagement, he personally reconnoitred the terrain, often on foot and at considerable personal risk. He studied German tactical procedures, noting their preference for certain types of terrain and approach routes. He positioned his tank where German forces were likely to appear but where they would not expect effective opposition. By early December 1941, Lavrinenko had been promoted to senior lieutenant and given increased responsibility within the 1st Guards Tank Brigade. His reputation had spread beyond his immediate unit. Soviet military leadership, desperate for positive examples amid the catastrophic casualties of 1941, began documenting his achievements. On December 5th, he was recommended for the Hero of the Soviet Union Award for destroying 37 German tanks during 2 months of combat. The recommendation understated his actual achievements, which were higher. During the Soviet counteroffensive that began in early December 1941, Lavrinenko's platoon participated in the liberation of the villages around Volokholamsk. His forces supported operations involving the 316th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Ivan Panfilov. The 316th Division would become famous for its desperate defense against German forces, and Lavrinenko's tanks provided critical armoured support during these battles. December 18th, 1941 began as another day in the grinding combat around Moscow. Soviet forces were advancing, pushing German units back from positions they had reached in their drive toward the capital. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade received orders to liberate the village of Goryuni as part of the broader offensive. Lavrinenko commanded a tank company in the assault, supported by combat engineers who cleared minefields. The attack on Goryuni proceeded according to plan. German forces, weakened by the Soviet offensive and struggling in winter conditions, could not hold their positions against coordinated Soviet attacks. Lavrinenko's tanks, working with infantry and engineers, destroyed the German garrison. In the final engagement, Lavrinenko's tank destroyed a German heavy tank, marking his 52nd confirmed kill. 2 anti-tank guns and approximately 50 German soldiers were also eliminated. With Guderian secured, Lavrinenko prepared to report to Lieutenant Colonel N. Chernoyarov, commander of the 17th Tank Brigade, who was coordinating operations in the sector. Lavrinenko dismounted from his T-34 near the village centre and began walking toward the command post. German artillery, responding to the loss of Guderian, began shelling the village intensively. Mortar shells impacted throughout the village. A mortar shell detonated near Lavrinenko as he walked toward the command post. Shell fragments struck him, inflicting wounds that were immediately fatal. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Fyodorovich Lavrinenko died on December 18, 1941, near the village of Guderian in the Volokolamsk region. He was 27 years old. He had been in sustained combat for 75 days, participating in 28 engagements. Colonel Mikhail Katukov learned of his death within hours. Katukov, a reserved officer not given to emotional displays, later wrote that his eyes went black when he heard the news. He said that Lavrinenko and death seemed incompatible concepts. The young officer had survived so many engagements that he seemed invulnerable. Yet he died not in his tank where his armour provided protection, but walking across a village struck by random artillery fire. The reaction among German tank crews to Lavrinenko's death is not documented because they did not know who he was. The Wehrmacht never identified the specific Soviet tank commander who had inflicted such consistent losses on German forces. Intelligence reports noted skilled Soviet tank operations in that area, but German forces did not have assets to track individual enemy commanders. Lavrinenko's final tally of 52 confirmed tank kills made him the highest-scoring Allied tank ace of World War II. No American, British or other Soviet tank commander achieved this number during the entire war. German aces like Kurt Knispel and Otto Carius achieved higher totals, but they operated for years, often in technologically superior vehicles. Lavrinenko achieved his total in 75 days, often outnumbered, frequently outgunned. The comparison with German aces reveals the unique nature of Lavrinenko's achievement. Michael Wittmann, probably the most famous German tank ace, required over 3 years to achieve approximately 138 confirmed kills. Lavrinenko operated under opposite conditions. He commanded a tank with a 2-man turret that forced him to serve as both commander and gunner. Soviet doctrine in 1941 emphasized mass rather than individualized tactics. Most critically, he faced the Wehrmacht at the height of its tactical proficiency. Soviet military authorities initially refused to believe that Lavrinenko had destroyed 52 German tanks in such a short period. The number seemed impossible given the chaotic fighting around Moscow. Awards were delayed by bureaucratic skepticism. The recommendation for Hero of the Soviet Union submitted on December 5th was not acted upon. On December 22nd, Lavrinenko was posthumously awarded the Order of Lenin, but not the military recognition his achievements warranted. Full recognition came only decades later. On May 5, 1990, nearly 50 years after his death, Dmitry Fyodorovich Lavrinenko was finally awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union title. Soviet military historians, examining wartime records and interviewing surviving members of the 1st Guards Tank Brigade, confirmed his kill total. Combat logs, after-action reports, and witness testimony verified that Lavrinenko had destroyed 52 enemy armoured vehicles in 75 days. The delay in recognition reflected the chaos of war years and the difficulty Soviet authorities had accepting that individual excellence could achieve such results. Soviet military culture emphasized collective achievement over individual heroism, yet the records could not be disputed. Lavrinenko had developed tactical methods that multiplied his effectiveness beyond what should have been possible. For German tank crews operating in the Moscow sector during October through December 1941, the experience of facing Lavrinenko's tactics foreshadowed the evolution of Soviet armoured warfare. In the early months of Operation Barbarossa, German crews had grown accustomed to Soviet tanks that attacked in predictable formations. Lavrinenko represented something different, a Soviet tank commander who understood terrain and timing. The T-34 tanks that German intelligence had initially dismissed were proving formidable weapons in the hands of commanders who understood their capabilities. The combination of sloped armor, high-velocity gun, and superior mobility created tactical options no previous Soviet tank had offered. Lavrinenko exploited these advantages systematically. By December 1941, some German units had begun modifying tactics specifically to counter the threat posed by T-34 tanks. They increased reconnaissance before advancing through sectors where Soviet armor might be concealed. They coordinated more closely with anti-tank units. They became more cautious about pursuing retreating Soviet forces. These tactical adjustments came too late to affect Lavrinenko's combat career. The ultimate significance of Lavrinenko's career lies in what it demonstrated about Soviet armored warfare. In 75 days, a young lieutenant developed tactical methods that would eventually be incorporated into Soviet tank doctrine. His emphasis on reconnaissance, terrain utilization, and crew survivability contradicted official Soviet doctrine. His success proved that Soviet tank crews, when properly led, could defeat German armor despite inferior numbers. Lavrinenko's death on December 18th removed from the battlefield a tactical innovator whose methods might have influenced Soviet operations throughout the war. The question of what he might have achieved with more time remains unanswerable. German aces who survived accumulated kills in the hundreds over years. Lavrinenko had only 75 days. In that span, he destroyed more enemy tanks than any other Allied commander would achieve during 4 years. For German tank crews who unknowingly faced him, during those months of 1941, Lavrinenko represented the end of easy victories on the Eastern Front. The blitzkrieg that had carried the Wehrmacht from the Soviet border to the gates of Moscow was grinding to a halt. The Red Army that had collapsed in chaos during summer 1941 was beginning to develop the tactical competence that would eventually carry it to Berlin. The single T-34 that appeared from nowhere, destroyed German tanks with precision fire, and vanished became a symbol of Soviet adaptation. That tank was often commanded by Dmitri Lavrinenko, who had survived the disasters of early Barbarossa and emerged as the most effective tank commander on either side during 1941. His 52 confirmed kills in 28 engagements represented an average of nearly 2 German tanks destroyed per combat action. When German military historians later analysed the failure of Operation Barbarossa, they focused on strategic factors. Winter weather, logistical problems, and numerical superiority all received attention. What received less emphasis was the emergence of Soviet tactical competence at the small unit level. Tank commanders like Lavrinenko, who learned to coordinate with armour and infantry, represented individual improvements that accumulated into strategic significance. Lavrinenko did not live to see the Soviet victory he helped make possible. He died on a winter day near Moscow, killed by a random shell fragment, having achieved more in 75 days than most soldiers achieve in careers spanning years. His T-34 remained on the battlefield, transferred to another crew. The German tank crews who had faced him continued their advance, unaware that one of their most dangerous opponents was dead. The war continued, becoming longer and bloodier than either side had anticipated. But in those 75 days between October 6th and December 18th, 1941, a young Soviet officer demonstrated that technical inferiority and numerical disadvantage could be overcome by tactical excellence. Dmitri Lavrinenko destroyed 52 German tanks not through superior equipment, but through intelligent application of combined arms principles, terrain exploitation, and crew discipline. His achievement stands as testimony to the decisive importance of tactical skill in armoured warfare. For German Panzer crews who faced him without knowing his identity, Lavrinenko represented a disturbing evolution in Soviet capabilities. For Soviet armour forces, he provided an example of how the T-34 could be employed to maximum effect. For military historians, his brief combat career offers insights into the transition of late 1941, when Soviet forces began learning the lessons that would eventually enable them to defeat the Wehrmacht. And for students of armoured warfare, his 52 confirmed kills in 75 days represent a standard that has never been surpassed by any Allied tank commander.